Today, we're going to dig into one of the most famous and, let's be honest, most controversial experiments in the entire history of psychology. We're winding the clock all the way back to 1920 to unpack a story that starts with a pretty simple question and ends with a little boy who was literally taught how to be afraid. Just for a second, think about the things that scare you. Spiders, heights, public speaking, whatever it is. Where do you think that feeling comes from? Was it something you were just born with, hardwired into your brain? Or did you learn it somewhere along the way? That is the big question we're tackling.
And this is where it all kicks off. In 1920, two researchers, John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner, published this groundbreaking paper. And in it, they explained how they decided to test this idea by conducting an experiment on a subject who couldn't say no, couldn't run away, couldn't even talk, a 9-month-old baby.
Now, this subject is known to history by a nickname, a name that's now famous in basically every psychology textbook ever written: Little Albert.
The specific baby they chose is super important here. According to their own notes, Albert was this incredibly stable kid. He was healthy, he almost never cried, and they described him as stolid and unemotional. So this wasn't some jumpy, anxious baby. No, they picked him specifically because he was so calm and fearless.
So before they did anything, they had to set a baseline. What was he already afraid of? They showed him a whole bunch of stuff: a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, and his reaction? Total curiosity. He even reached out to touch them. They tried masks, a ball of cotton wool, even some burning newspaper. Nothing. He had absolutely zero fear. The takeaway here is crucial. This kid was basically fearless.
Well, almost fearless. In all their testing, the researchers did find one thing, just one, that could reliably make little Albert scared.
And this was their secret weapon: a loud, jarring noise. Whenever an experimenter snuck up behind him and smacked a steel bar with a hammer, clang, he'd jump and start to cry. This is what scientists call an unconditioned stimulus. It's something you don't have to learn to be scared of, it's just instinct. And now, they had the tool they needed.
All right, so they've got their fearless baby, and they've got their fear-making tool. The experiment was ready to begin. The big question was, could they take Albert's natural fear of that loud noise and attach it to something he wasn't afraid of at all?
The process itself was brutally simple. When Albert was about 11 months old, they brought out the white rat again. And just like before, he reached out to touch it. But the second his hand made contact, clang! They hit the steel bar right behind his head. They were pairing the harmless rat with that terrifying sound.
This quote from their own notes is just chilling. It gives you a front-row seat to that moment. He didn't just get startled, he jumped violently, and he fell right over. The conditioning was starting to work.
So they kept doing it. Rat, reach, clang. Rat, reach, clang. And you know what? It didn't take long at all. In fact, it only took 7 times, spread out over 2 different sessions, for them to get the result they were looking for.
And the result was, whoa! It was dramatic. The white rat, the same one that he was curious about just a week earlier, now caused pure terror all by itself. They didn't even need the loud noise anymore. Just seeing the rat made Albert cry and scramble to get away as fast as he could. They had done it. They had conditioned a phobia into a human being. But they weren't finished. Watson and Rayner had another question. Was this fear only for the white rat, or had they created something bigger?
So they started bringing in other things, and what they discovered was pretty mind-blowing. A rabbit, which he was totally fine with before, now made him cry and try to crawl away. A dog, same reaction. A soft, furry coat. Even a simple ball of cotton wool. A Santa Claus mask also freaked him out.
The fear had generalized. See, Albert wasn't just scared of that one specific rat anymore. He was now scared of things that were white and furry. They hadn't just taught him a fear, they taught him a whole category of fear.
And this, right here, is probably the most haunting part of the whole story. So they successfully created a phobia in a child. They proved their point. So, what next? Did they fix it? Did they try to reverse what they had done? The answer is no. This quote from the very end of their paper just lays it all out. Albert's mother, who worked at the hospital, ended up moving and taking her son with her. And the researchers just write it off, saying the opportunity to remove the fears was, quote, denied us. And it's not like they didn't have ideas. They had a whole list of techniques they wanted to try to decondition him. Things like pairing the rat with candy, or just showing him the objects over and over until he got used to them. But they were just ideas.
Little Albert just left the hospital, carrying all the fears they had given him.
Now, today, an experiment like this would be absolutely unthinkable. It would break every single ethical rule in the book. But the things they discovered sent shockwaves through psychology that we still feel today.
So what's the big takeaway? Well, there are two huge things. First, this was pretty solid proof that our emotional responses, like fear, can be learned. It suggests that a lot of our fears aren't innate, they're conditioned. And second, it showed how these learned fears can spread, how one bad experience with one thing can make us anxious about a whole range of similar things.
Watson and Rayner even guessed at what the long-term effects might be. They wrote that they believed these early learned fears don't just go away. They thought they stick around and actually change and shape our personalities for our entire lives. We'll never know what happened to the real little Albert, but the men who did this to him believed they had fundamentally changed who he was going to be.
And that really leaves us with one final, pretty powerful question to think about. We can look back at this experiment 100 years later and be horrified by it. But the principle, that still stands. So what were your little Albert moments? What small, maybe even forgotten things from your childhood, a dog that barked too loud, a sudden fall, might have conditioned the fears and anxieties that are still, in some small way, shaping who you are today?